The uncomfortable truth about the war in Gaza: the war in Gaza is not just a conflict between two peoples. It is a story that spans decades of disputes, broken promises, international interests, and human tragedies that are rarely told in detail. For many, it seems to have started recently, but the reality is far more complex. It all goes back to 1948, when the State of Israel was created after World War II. At that time, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from their homes in a process that Arabs call the Nakba, or the catastrophe. Entire families were separated, villages destroyed, and much of the Palestinian population was forced to live as refugees in improvised camps. Gaza, a small strip of land measuring only 365 square kilometers, smaller than the city of Fortaleza in Brazil, became one of the main refuges for this displaced population. Since then, the region has lived under a kind of permanent confinement. To put it in perspective, Gaza is now one of the most densely populated places in the world, with more than 2 million people in an extremely small area. That's nearly 6,000 people per square kilometer, living in precarious conditions, surrounded by borders, and with extremely limited resources. The blockade imposed by Israel, with Egypt's support in some periods, restricts the entry of food, medicine, fuel, and building materials. Few people know this, but even the number of calories entering Gaza each day has been calculated by Israeli authorities in the past. As a way to control what the population could consume, it was a silent strategy to keep residents always dependent, but never truly free. The cycle of violence worsened after the rise of the Hamas group, which took control of Gaza in 2007. Since then, several wars have erupted, always following the same pattern. Hamas launches rockets at Israel, and Israel responds with massive bombings that hit not only military targets, but also civilian areas. The result is devastating: thousands dead, tens of thousands wounded, and entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. And here's a little-known fact. Independent reports show that the majority of the victims of this conflict are not combatants. In several analyses, around 70% to 80% of deaths in Gaza are civilians, women, children, and the elderly. To put this into perspective, during the first 9 months of the war, more than 191,000 buildings were destroyed or damaged in the Gaza Strip. That represents almost the entire urban infrastructure of an entire city. We are not only talking about military buildings, but also hospitals, schools, markets, and even historic churches. Another little discussed fact is that Gaza has already been called the largest open-air prison in the world. This is because the population has no freedom of movement. Entering or leaving the Gaza Strip depends on rare authorizations, usually denied. Many young people have never known anything beyond those few square kilometers. They grow up under bombings, with drones constantly flying overhead, and the uncertainty of whether they will live to see the next day. On the Israeli side, fear is also constant. The rockets fired from Gaza, although most are intercepted by the defense system known as the Iron Dome, keep millions of people on alert, running to shelters at every siren. For Israelis, it is impossible to forget the attacks, kidnappings, and assaults that have marked their recent history. But if the war is so painful for both sides, why doesn't it end? The answer lies in interests that go far beyond Gaza. The arms industry is one of the sectors that profits most from the conflict. With every bombing, more weapons and ammunition are sold. Companies tied to military production, both in Israel and in other countries, make billions of dollars. For many analysts, the war has become a profitable business, and ending the conflict would mean losing million-dollar contracts. In addition, Gaza occupies a strategic position in the Middle East. The region is close to important trade routes, near the Mediterranean, and close to countries rich in oil and natural gas. Keeping the conflict active allows international powers to continue exerting influence over agreements, borders, and energy negotiations. Another rarely discussed point is the political use of the war. In Israel, governments often harden their stance against Gaza to maintain domestic support, especially during political crises. On the Palestinian side, groups like Hamas use armed resistance as a way to legitimize themselves before the population, even if it costs civilian lives. Thus, while leaders gain political strength, it is always ordinary people who pay the price. And then there is the information war. On social media, fake images and old videos circulate as if they were current, confusing public opinion. Few people know that even video game footage has been used in clips to simulate real attacks in Gaza. This type of manipulation spreads hatred, reinforces stereotypes, and makes it even harder to find a path to peace. Despite all this, hope persists. Amidst the rubble, children continue attending makeshift schools and tents. Families share what little they have so that no one dies of hunger. And around the world, millions protest against the violence, demanding a ceasefire and the recognition of Palestinian rights. The future, however, remains uncertain. The war can end in two ways: through the complete extermination of one side, unlikely and tragic, or through dialogue, which would require real concessions, guaranteed security for Israel, and true freedom for the Palestinian people. The problem is that this path threatens the interests of those who profit and gain power from war. The reality is harsh. As long as weapons, oil, and politics are worth more than human lives, the war in Gaza will hardly come to an end. But the question that echoes is simple and devastating. How long will the world accept that innocents must die so that a few can continue to profit?